This extract is from Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Now, if you haven't read or heard of Fahrenheit 451, it's a really kind of pivotal, really good short dystopian novel. So it deals with a world where things have gone wrong, where the government has imposed all sorts of restrictions, and where there is a different way of thinking which is designed to illustrate the problems with our own society and make us reflect on what's going on at any given time. So Fahrenheit 451 itself is well worth a read, but what we're going to do here is just to take a very short extract and look at developing analytical skills, so those close reading skills where you've got questions that say, how does the writer present, or explore how the writer presents ideas of. Anything that's basically asking you to look at a piece of writing and to see how the writer's choices are then impacting upon the reader. So if first of all we have a look at it, I'm not going to read it out to you. What I will do is whiz through some vocabulary just in case that's useful. So if you need to, pause a moment and just read the extract on the screen. And then just doing a vocab check first of all. Bear with me if you know about these things. We get, as ever, a little contextualising summary, which you have to read. I know some students I've spoken to have said, oh, I always skip that. There's usually something very useful for your interpretation or understanding within that little introduction to the piece you're reading. So don't skip it, make sure you look at it. And we discover here our protagonist, our main character, is called Montag. He's working as a fireman. We think we know what that means. But this is the little section that you need to read. Actually, Montag's world is this dark and brutal place where books are banned and burned by firemen using kerosene being a flammable oil. Okay, so you need to understand from that little contextualising bit that a fireman in this world is very different to a fireman in our world. Montag is going around actively burning things. So we then have the first kind of little bit, Fahrenheit 451, again, that's a temperature measure, and we're told that it's the temperature at which book paper catches fire and burns. If we then look at vocabulary, you might kind of whiz through and just kind of being really careful. We all know what everything means. Nozzle is the end of something, so like a fitting where something comes out or you attach something to something else. Okay, so we're looking at the end of a hose pipe, that kind of metal bit on the end that's allowing a fireman or whoever's using the hose pipe to direct the flow. Python is a large snake. Okay, that's where the coding Python reference comes from. But we've got a large snake. Venomous means poisonous or means with venom. Okay, kerosene is the oil. Symphony is a great kind of magnificent piece of music played by an orchestra. You have then, looking at stolid, is a different word from solid. And it's a difference that is easily missed. Okay, stolid means that somebody isn't showing a lot of emotions, nothing's registering with them. They are kind of very blank faced. So kind of, it can be a good thing. It can mean that you're reliable, that you're dependable. It can be kind of emotionless. Okay, so, you know, he's not reacting. We've then got igniter. Think about ignition, setting fire to something. This is a gadget that's going to ignite. Gorging, this verb here is being used as an adjective. To gorge means to stuff yourself full of food, to kind of really kind of carry on eating and eating and eating until you're kind of uncomfortable. You then have fireflies. If you aren't familiar with how fireflies look, just do a quick Google images search. Marshmallows are a kind of sweet that you can toast over an open fire. Then I think the last thing That word just at the end is singed, okay, rather than singed. So to singe means to kind of burn the edges or the outer bit of something. So, you might say, I got so close to the fire that my eyebrows felt singed, okay, that they'd started to maybe kind of curl a little. So hopefully that allows you to understand what's going on. Next thing you're going to look back at the extract, and I'm going to actively read it. So I'm going to start to underline or highlight things that I think are going to be important, and do this yourself before you watch my section of the video. So all you need is some way of making a note of phrases or words that you think might be important, that you might want to kind of focus in on for your quotations. So just take a moment to do that yourself, and then we'll compare ideas. Right, okay, I'm going to start with this idea of special pleasure to see things eaten, because I think that eaten might be important. I'm going to underline blackened and changed, to underline fists, obviously the great python spitting its venomous kerosene, blood pounded in his head. Then I'm going to take this idea that his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies. That's quite a long one. If I'm underlining a long quotation, it's because I've kind of got several things to say about it. Okay, I'm not just going to write out chunks of the text. I'm going to make sure that I can talk about different elements of it. I'm going to take the idea of eyes all orange flame, gorging fire, might take flicked there, strode in a swarm of fireflies, pigeon-winged books died, sparkling whirls, wind turned dark with burning, fierce grin, singed and driven back by flame. Okay, so I've got some ideas, and really when you're practicing doing this, if you're not in exam conditions, the more you can practice bringing out the detail in your annotation, the more detailed and more sophisticated your thinking's going to be. So here, just going to change colour and then start to think about what I'd eat. So we're going to look at special pleasure. So positive, it's almost a kind of contradiction. Contradiction, to wait for my little thing to disappear on my screen saying I just undid that. There's pleasure in destruction. You could say it's oxymoronic. Okay, it's not an oxymoron as such, but you've got the idea of oxymoronic being that kind of contradictory idea. You're dealing with opposites of competing kind of ideas. Pleasure to see things eaten. Okay, so another word for eating, consumption. Okay, to consume. We know that the narrative is going to be describing the fire as alive, really. All sorts of things are alive. So the idea of eating, just consuming something, eating all of it. What kind of idea is being created by watching something get consumed, used up, especially when they're books. To see things blacken the effect of the fire and changed, that metamorphosis. Okay, metamorphosis is the idea of a kind of complete big change you've got there. So you'd think that this, in a different context, could be a very positive image, maybe. Watching, enjoying some food, or watching something, enjoy some food, that's something being changed, but here it's very negative. We have brass nozzle in his fists, so just the kind of aggression that implies, and the violence. It's not in his hands, it's in his fists. And here we have this metaphor of the great python. Okay, so you're going to look at the connotations of great, the idea of the power, the force behind it. Python is kind of predatory, right? Predatory snake, right? So the hose pipe, this metaphor is saying that the fireman's hose pipe is a great python, is a huge snake that's spitting. Okay, you've got the plosive P's there. Python spitting, kind of that noise. That is plosive alliteration. Okay, so any alliteration that's making you make that kind of spitting tends to be P's and B's. You can have some D's in there as well. Poisonous kerosene, so the oil there. This is an image of destruction. This is almost like he's kind of taking the natural world and turning it round to be something negative rather than positive. So if you take something and twist it like that, you say you subvert it. So you're subverting what would be normally a kind of positive, natural idea into a damaging and destructive one. If you wanted to, and you're thinking about sort of higher level things, it's always worth asking yourself when you come across any image of snakes, is this possibly connected to anything deeper from a biblical perspective? And sometimes, quite frankly, the answer is going to be no. So you stop it there. Okay, everything connected with snakes is not necessarily going to relate to Adam and Eve and serpents in the Garden of Eden and mankind losing their innocence and it all being awful. But sometimes the answer is, yeah, it could. Okay, and thinking really carefully about when you pursue that. Here, we have got something which is kind of acting against creation. It's this image of destruction. So I'd say that it's worth kind of exploring that maybe. Not huge paragraphs explaining what happened in the Bible, but, you know, the image of the python could potentially allude. Allude is spelt like this. It means where you make a kind of indirect reference to, could potentially allude to biblical imagery. And, you know, leaving it there will allow your reader who knows about it to go, oh, okay. And you haven't kind of wasted too much time if you've made the wrong call on that one. So we've then got the blood pounded. So again, these P's and B's, we've really got this plosive alliteration. And when you get plosive alliteration, you're going to talk about the force behind it, the creation of kind of a sense of violence or force, just because you get that kind of p sound coming out. But we switch to kind of Montag's view. So after all of this kind of threat, danger, power, predatory imagery, destructive imagery, Montag views himself as an amazing conductor, right? We've got, again, another metaphor, right? He is a conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. So he views what he's doing as something kind of creative, something with a skill and an art form. So you're going to talk about the kind of implications of that metaphor there in terms of Montag's world view, Montag's perception of things. If you think of a conductor of an orchestra, is the one who is in charge of the kind of real artistic interpretation of it all. He's got his helmet, his eyes all orange flame, jumping to the next one. All he can see is the fire. He's completely focused on what he's doing and the destruction it's causing. So his eyes are not orange flame. Again, we're speaking metaphorically, but it's showing, again, his perception. I'd pick up on the kind of quick, hard consonants of flick there. You know, it's almost like it's kind of precise, tight, that he's doing it kind of very in a very focused way, you know, to flick. And then he's setting fire to everything, and the fire becomes a gorging fire, so you've got kind of personification there. The fire is alive, the fire is eating, the fire is consuming. And it actually, just fitting in that idea, it burned the evening sky. You know, this fire is taking over the world. Okay, it's kind of picking up on that idea of the snake imagery and the anti-version of creation, the destruction that's there. This fire is kind of changing the sky. You've got the kind of polysyndeton there, which is the repetition of that conjunction, okay, polysyndeton or polysyndactic listing, to build up all the colours red and yellow and black. You can possibly comment on the idea of black being incongruous, right? If something is incongruous, it's kind of not quite fitting. You know, evening skies, sunset should be red and yellow, yes. Black, no. Okay, so this is again taking a natural idea and distorting it. He strode in a swarm of fireflies is again another metaphor. These fireflies are not the natural little insects that appear at twilight. They are the bits of ash. You know, when you kind of burn something and bits of ash kind of swirl up everywhere, they look like fireflies. So he's in this kind of distorted natural world where everything is relating to fire. The fire is alive, the snakes are the hose pipes. Everything's being destroyed rather than created. And the victims of this are the flapping pigeon-winged books. So if you think of opening a book and then kind of waving it round, the wings, the pages kind of flap round, and it's like he's kind of killing the books. Okay, there is an example of zoomorphism here. Okay, zoomorphism is when you do what you're doing with personification, only it's animal qualities. So zoo animals, morphism is morph to change. And they died, yeah? So the books are being killed. This is an image of destruction and death. Sparkling whirls seem kind of, again, beautiful in a way that doesn't fit, that kind of distorts your perception of what's good and what's bad. And a wind turned dark with burning. You can start to link this evening sky, this effect on the natural world here, this distortion is all coming into play. And then Montag grinned the fierce grin. Kind of, you can argue that is an oxymoron to show the kind of confusion in this world and the conflict within himself of all men singed and driven back by flame. And there's a kind of ominous note there that actually Montag doesn't seem to be in charge of this fire. If he's burned by it and driven back by it, you know, he's created something which is super powerful, which now could be getting out of control. So when you've got that far, you should have kind of a scribbled on piece of paper or a fully annotated piece of paper. And I would then, with a different colour, start to collect together your images. So you might kind of start to go for all the different times when there's plosive alliteration being used, because you want to kind of make the point that Bradbury is using plosive alliteration throughout to convey a sense of power and violence. You might want to start looking at the images which kind of distort things. So, you know, this blackened and changed, linking it into this kind of natural world going wrong. You might want to start looking at the use of metaphor, maybe, grouping things together from there. But it's going to be a much better piece of writing if you're organising your ideas. So you're not going through it chronologically and having to kind of talk about metaphor and then talk about plosive alliteration and then talk about metaphor again and then plosive alliteration again, because you're encountering them through the text. It's going to be better if you can group them together, so you can then spot how a writer is changing or shaping his or her use of that technique. So when you've got that far, start to plan out your different paragraphs. And, you know, you might want to start with an overview, your introduction, saying Bradbury presents Montag and the fire not only as Blair, but also as Blair and Blair, okay? And what goes in those three Blair marks is going to help you shape the rest of your answer. Because if you say the fire as powerful and violent, but also as distorting the natural world and potentially getting out of control, it starts to kind of shape your paragraphs. You know that you're going to talk about those three ideas. You might want to add another sentence which says he does this through the use of, and then maybe pick up 3 of the techniques that you know you're going to talk about. So he does this through the use of metaphor, plosive alliteration, and destructive imagery, or images of destruction, maybe. And then again, you've got those checklisted off. So you've got some shape to your writing. You're going to start your paragraphs with clear topic sentences. So, Bradbury uses plosive alliteration to create the sense of destruction or violence. Then the rest of that paragraph is going to use your embedded quotations that you've picked out to give me examples, to really persuade me that you're onto something there. You're not repeating what's in the quotation, you're not translating it or paraphrasing it. Your reader can do that for themselves. You've got to bring something extra to the party. Think about what we've talked about in terms of the connections. You're aiming for whoever's reading your essay to kind of go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that, rather than, well, yeah, it says that in the text. Okay? When you've done, say, 3 paragraphs on that, made your 3 points, talked about your methods and the effect of those, supported them with embedded quotations, making sure you're writing paragraphs rather than just hitting a wall of text, then you might give a sentence or 2 to round up to say, in this way, Bradbury not only conveys the fire as this, but also as this through. Okay, so you're just summing up, bringing it all together without that quick line or lines at the end. Hopefully this has been helpful. Good luck. Enjoy Fahrenheit 451 if you read it. Bye now.